I'm going to show you today how to make a little zipped bag. Now you can make these in loads and loads of different sizes. The most important thing is that you choose the zip length that you want to use. I'm using a metal zip, so this has to remain this length. It doesn't really work very well cutting down a metal zip. You can do, but it's just more faff. So I prefer to choose the zip length that I want to dictate the size of my finished bag and take it from there. So this is a 20cm zip. You need three main items. You need a zip, you need some lining fabric, and you need your outer fabric. These are the basic ingredients you need, but there's little extra things you can add which really elevate and make your project really special, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So I talked about the length of your zip. I'm going to cap the ends of my zip, so I've also cut some extra little bits of fabric. These are 6 centimetres by 4 centimetres, and I'm going to use them to enclose the ends of my zip. The benefit of doing this is it means that when you then stitch your bag together, the ends of the zip don't go into the corners of the bag, they stay proud of it at the top, which gives you a really nice finish, like this. So this is one that I've made earlier. Let me show you how to do that now. So I have my zip here and I'm going to cap the ends with my turquoise fabric. I'm going to stitch really close to this metal, which is why I'm using an adjustable zipper foot, so I can get nice and close without hitting the metal. Now I'm going to cut the end of my zip off and wrap the fabric all the way around, folding the end over to the middle and then bringing that over again so it just covers that row of stitching. Then from the front, I'm going to stitch along the edge of the fabric. By folding the fabric like this, I can guarantee that on stitching on the edge, I'm going to catch the fabric on the other side. Trim off the ends and you've got a nice little cap on the end of your zip like this. I'm now going to repeat the same with the other end. So I've capped the end of my zip as so. Now for the outer fabric, I've decided to use this really beautiful velvet panel which we have in the shop. We've got lots of different styles of this and there's a lot delivery of it's just coming in as well, which is really exciting. But I don't think it's quite wide enough for the bag that I want to make. So I have interfaced some velvety baby cord, which I'm going to use to extend and make this bag a little bit bigger, to make this front panel the length I want it to be. So I've put the interfacing on to give it the same sort of weight and structure as this velvet, and making sure that all the velvet goes the same way, I'm going to attach this using a very small seam allowance along here and a very small seam allowance on here so I can make the panel the right size. The panel is bigger than the length of my capped zip. So the kind of formula that I use for the zip is the length of your zip plus a centimetre each end for the caps, plus then a centimetre beyond that for the length of the panel in total, which then gives you room to actually stitch past the end without catching these little tabs in. And that's how you can get a really nice finish and this corner like I was showing you earlier. So I'll just do that for you now. Just checking which way the velvet goes on these panels. So this all goes down, so I want to pin this onto here. I've left these on purpose a tiny bit extra in length in case there's any wobbles at the end, because I can trim it all down afterwards, but the panel comes as a set size and I didn't want to compromise using the whole panel. So I'm going to use a really small seam allowance on this. So you can see I've left a little bit extra just at the ends, so that when it's turned out I can just trim all that to make it really flat. Ooh, I'll go back to a normal sewing foot for this. And then at the bottom, I want to make sure, again, the velvet goes the right way. So this is going down, this is going down. So I'm going to attach this here. Now I'm going to give this panel a good press. So now I have my two panels and my zip, but I need to trim these panels down because I've left them, like I described, with just the raw edges sticking out. I want to trim them down so that the velvet, I'm using absolutely every centimetre of the velvet. I'm just going to trim these little bits off here and these little bits off here, so that I've got a nice straight panel to work with. However accurately you start with your panels, I always think that it's better to just give yourself that little bit of leeway here because things can shift very slightly, especially when you're working with velvet. So just give yourself that extra little room for error and then you can just trim it off afterwards because the panel is a set size. So now I've got a nice rectangle. Now the reason I've left it longer at the bottom is because I want to sugar bag the bottom of this. So there's going to be a border of red at the top and a border about the same size at the bottom, and then the rest of it is going to become the base of the bag. So that's why I've left that a little bit longer. So the next stage, I'm going to pin my zip face down onto the outer panel, leaving an equal size at each end. So once one side of your zip is attached, you then do the other side, making sure that these edges are bang on top of each other so that your bag is as square as possible. So leaving the same size seam allowance at the ends. Now I'm going to stitch it. So I'm ready to stitch my zip, but I'm not going to use an adjustable zipper foot this time. I'm actually going to just swing my needle over to the left, which I can do on my machine really easily, because I want to show some of this zip. With some zips you don't really want to see much of them, but this one is quite the opposite, so it's really pretty. I want to show off as much of that sparkly zip as possible, so I'm going to stitch, in fact, even a little bit further back. And when you get close to your zip, leave the needle in the down position, lift the foot and slide your zip all the way out of the way. Replace the foot and carry on sewing. Repeat with the other side. See how that shows off those lovely teeth on that zip. So now I have my outer fabric sewn together with my zip in the middle. We need to double check that the lining pieces are exactly the same size as the outside of the bag. So I've just cut these out to exactly the same dimensions as the unstitched outer. Next, going to sandwich the zip between the lining and the outer of the bag. But this is where you can add some little extras to make it extra special. So I'm actually going to pop onto my lining a little label quite close to the top so that when you open the bag you can see it just on the inside there. So I will line that up and make sure that's bang in the centre, and I'm just going to stitch around there. I'm also going to add another little label. I love these. I'm going to put this little label here, going down the outside of the bag so it comes out of the side seam. So I'm going to clip that on there, I'm going to stitch that on just within the side seam now, and I'm going to stitch that on so that when I sew my bag together, those little finishing touches are already in place. So here's my cute little label. I'm going to stitch it right there on the side seam. Then I'm just going to test to see how much of it's going to stick out once this bag's sewn together. I might even bring that over a little further. And sew it right on the edge, so it's just a really small amount that sticks out at the side. Perfect. So next I'm going to add my internal label. So I've just folded my fabric in half to find the middle, because I want it to be bang in the middle. And I'm going to just use this low tack glue to stick my label in position. Just helps where pins just get a bit cumbersome. We sell this, this has got dot to dot written on it, but we sell this on our website as well, the basting glue. So with my little labels attached, one in the side seam and one on the lining, I'm now going to sandwich my zip between my outer and my inner layers. So with the wrong side of the zip facing upwards, I'm now going to place the lining with the label towards the top so it shows when you open the zip along that line. I'm going to stitch from the side, from your side, in that row of stitching so I can follow my existing stitching. All the way along here. And now my second piece of lining on that side of the zip, following the same technique. To the sewing machine. So I'm going to follow my existing row of stitching along here, where I originally attached my zip to the outer fabric. This way I can make sure that I don't waver from that line and I can keep my stitching consistent. I am going to, however, have to watch out for where my zip is because I obviously can't see it so easily. So I'm going to start with pulling it out of the way, and then about here I'm going to turn it over and pull the zip back out of the way. Now that I know there's a good chunk of space for me to pull the zip out of the way, I'm going to lift the foot, pull the zip slider all the way to the back. Now it's up here and I can carry on. And then I'm going to repeat with the other side. I've just been having a look at my bag and I think the proportions of this, it's going to be quite tall and quite upright, and I think it would be really good for holding something like perfume bottles. So I'm actually going to make my bag a little bit padded on the lining layer. So I've just cut 2 pieces of lightweight iron-on wadding, which I'm going to fuse to the inside of these panels, just to give the inside of the bag just a little bit of squidge. So, to the iron. So I've just ironed the wadding onto the back of my lining fabric, which just gives it a really satisfying little squidge. And I'm now ready to sew my bag together. So with the right sides facing of the lining and the right sides of the outer facing, I'm going to stitch all the way round the outer edge of the lining and the bag, the outer bag, leaving a little gap in the lining. But it's really important to make sure that this seam here matches up perfectly. So I'm going to put a pin in there, and likewise at this corner. And we're going to stitch just outside of where that little fabric zip tab is. So matching up those seams, I'm going to pin where I intend to stitch. This way I know exactly when I'm at that sewing machine that I'm stitching in the right place. So I'm going to pin that all the way around. So down the side that I'm going to leave open on my lining, I'm just going to put my pins going sideways. This is just as a visual reminder, so I generally put my pins in the direction that I'm going to stitch so that the head is towards me and I can pull them out easily as I stitch. But then I've turned these pins sideways just to give me that extra visual reminder that that's where I'm going to stop and leave a gap. In fact, I'm going to start here, work my way round and then stop at this end. That gap there should be big enough for me to pull all of my bag through later. In fact, I'm going to give myself just another ½ inch because this is quite stiff and this is quite padded, so all needs to fit through that gap. So I'm ready to sew. Starting from my sideways pin, I'm going to stitch all the way around the outside of the bag, making sure that I'm lined up so that I stitch just where my pin is there next to the end of my zip tab. So I've stitched around the whole of the outside perimeter of my lining and my outer panel of my bag, leaving that gap like I spoke of, where I can pull the entire bag through. I used a really small seam allowance on this because I don't want to lose too much of that velvet panel because it is a set printed design. I want to, however, sugar bag the bottom of this pouch, which will give the bag a sort of 3D sort of stand-up nature. So if I show you with one that isn't, this is just stitched flat, but if I was to fold those corners under like so, you can see how that would sort of stand up and take on a 3D nature. So I'm going to do that by stitching this from the inside. This technique is called sugar bagging. The top panel of my bag is 4 centimetres deep, so I'd quite like it to be 4 centimetres deep at the bottom before the velvet disappears under the bottom. So 4 centimetres in is there and there. Now to create this technique I need to grab the two sides, this is quite stiff, it's a little bit tricky, but grab the two sides like this of my bag. I think of it a bit like opening a packet of crisps, and I'm going to pull that open and then splay this seam allowance here apart and this seam allowance here apart too. So what you're aiming for is for this seam to match up exactly. So if I stab a pin through from this side through that seam, I should be able to come out through that seam, because you want those to be lined up at the bottom. So I'm in business. That is where I'm going to do my stitch line. So there I'm going to draw a line going all the way across. And that is where I'm going to stitch. So it should be 4 centimetres up from that bottom corner, and each of these should also be 4 centimetres. If it's a bit off, then you know that you're not quite lined up in the middle, but by stabbing a pin all the way through that seam and coming out on the other side on that seam, you know that it's lined up straight. So I'm going to continue and do that on all 4 of the corners, of the 2 corners of the outer and the 2 corners of the lining, making sure I use that 4 centimetres each time. You can decide whichever measurement you want to use for yours. The longer the measurement, the wider the bottom of the bag, but also the more the bag will pull in at the bottom like this. So have a little play around with your measurements and see what works for you. I'm just going to get busy pinning this now. So I've pinned all 4 of my corners, and I'm now going to go to the sewing machine and stitch across those. So with my seam allowances splayed open, front and back, if possible, I'm going to stitch all the way across this section. My bag now has 4 little ears, and I'm ready to snip the corners. I'm going to cut off this excess fabric here at the corner of these, because it's just going to add unnecessary bulk in my bag. So where I trimmed the ends off, I felt that this seam was a little bit exposed, a bit vulnerable, so I've stitched backwards and forwards over this several times just to make sure that I've given it the extra strength on the outside of the bag. I'm now ready to turn the whole thing out the right way. So this is the really exciting bit. My bag now looks like this, like some kind of weird fortune cookie, and I'm ready to turn it out the right way. This is like giving birth to a bag, but hopefully less painful. So I'm going to get my hand right inside there and grab those corners, pull them through the right way, and just gently start teasing this through so that I'm not putting too much strain on the seams. If you can almost turn it in on itself first before you then start pulling it out through here, you're less likely to distress these seams. There's no pretty way of doing this. So I'm just going to tease these corners out into a nice sharp point if I can. And now pop my lining back inside and give it a good punch from the inside. Fill out those corners. This is the moment of truth where I can see whether my little corners have worked. And you can see where I've stitched next to the ends of my tab, which needs a few threads snipping off. So I haven't caught the end of those tabs in, so the zip sits quite nicely and proud at the top of that bag. I have got a few threads that need snipping off, then it's almost finished. So the next stage is to finish off the gap in your lining. So if I just pull this back out again, you might choose to hand stitch this, or you can pinch this really tight and sew this along on the sewing machine. Because I've put wadding in mine, I'm going to definitely do it by hand because that would make a really funny ridge if I was to do that with a sewing machine. So I'm going to finish that bit off by hand. And then the final touch for my bag is a tassel on the zip. I think this just really finishes it off. So the loop goes through there and then you pull the tassel through the loop, like so. Voila, a little zippy bag. I hope you've enjoyed watching. I hope you enjoy making your own. We have all of these velvet trims, a whole range of these on the website, so please do go and have a look. We've also got some lovely tassels like this, and of course a range of Kylie in the Machine labels. Happy sewing!